Although it seems like only yesterday that Toyota launched their funky gasoline-electric hybrid vehicle named the Toyota Prius, it was actually 20 years ago that very first Prius landed. Fuel economy back then was 35 miles per gallon in the city and 37 on the highway, but today this all-new 2016 Prius is nearly 60% more efficient at 58 miles per gallon city and 53 miles per gallon on the highway. In today's episode, we are taking a look at the 58 mile per gallon trim, which is the 2 Eco. If you get the 2, the 3, the 3 Touring, the 4, or the 4 Touring, you'll actually see a few fewer miles per gallon. Many people have derided the Prius for being just a little bit too egg-like, a little bit too boring in the past. They've helped change that for 2016 with an all-new, more aggressive front-end look that ties in with the rest of the new Toyota models in the US, especially the Toyota Mirai, which is their hydrogen fuel cell vehicle. We have new standard LED headlamps up front and optional fog lamps that are also LEDs. Our particular model does not get those. You do have to step up the model line in order to get them. As we see in a variety of new cars, the 2016 Prius manages to get wider, longer, and a little bit lower to the ground than before, while also being lighter weight. This is about 3 inches longer than the outgoing Prius at 178 inches long. That means that this Prius model is actually shorter than a Toyota Corolla, about 4 inches or so shorter. This is also 1 full foot shorter than the current generation Toyota Camry, even though we have about the same kind of interior room and actually a great deal more trunk space than you'll find in the Camry. The key to understanding the Prius is this lift-back profile, because if I go right back here, you'll notice that the rear glass opens with the tailgate. The supposed technical term for this particular look is not a hatchback, but a liftback. Perhaps the biggest change in form for the Prius is this back-end look. We still get the dual rear glass, so this actually is a piece of glass right here. You can actually see through it via the rear view mirror, but we get much more expressive tail lamps that curve with the vehicle. The vehicle does actually curve practically in this particular shape, but it's accentuated by this LED strip that runs inside. This reminds me a little bit of the hourglass shape that we see in modern Lexus vehicles as well. Aside from that, the rest of the back end is very, very practical. We get a very vertical form, which helps improve the overall exterior size to the interior dimensions, and we have no visible exhaust tips. Toyota generally prefers design evolution to design revolution, and that's exactly what we see under this hood. This 1.8-liter 4-cylinder engine is very closely related to the last generation Prius, although it has been thoroughly tweaked. Power figures come in at 95 horsepower and 105 pound-feet of torque for the engine alone. When you add in the hybrid system, that bumps up to 121 horsepower with an undisclosed amount of torque, although I estimate it to be between 130 and 140 foot-pounds. Toyota tells us that the power figures haven't really dropped since the last generation Prius. They've primarily changed the way they measure horsepower in hybrid systems like this. So this actually is a little bit faster 0 to 60 than the last generation Prius. It goes without saying, of course, that the Prius gets excellent fuel economy. We are driving the 2 Eco trim, which is rated for 58 miles per gallon city. It was fairly easy to get over 60 miles per gallon combined if you treat this vehicle gently. As with most cars, front seat comfort varies by trim level. We're in the 2 Eco, which is just one semi-step above the base trim. That means that we don't get adjustable lumbar supports or power seats. They are available, however, in higher-end trims. All models do get a tilt telescopic steering column with a wide range of motion. Although this is a full foot shorter than a Toyota Camry on the outside, on the inside, the combined legroom figure, that's front row plus second row, is just 3.8 inches smaller. However, because the Prius is shaped differently than a Camry, it's a little bit more upright, the seating position is a little bit more upright, especially in this rear bench seat, it means that I actually have about the same amount of legroom sitting right here behind myself with this front seat adjusted for me at 6 feet tall. I also have a hair of headroom, just about ½ an inch here. That's better than you find in a wide variety of mid-size sedans, even though this is sized closer to a Toyota Corolla. It's actually a little bit smaller, as I said before. This front seat is all the way back in its tracks, suitable for a 6'5" passenger. I have about an inch of legroom left there. Even if I sit over here in the middle seat, my head is now touching the ceiling, and we are in the model without the sunroof, but I could do this if I needed to. Because the Prius has gotten a little bit wider in this generation, it means that there's a little bit more width across the rear bench seat, but it actually has lost a hair of headroom versus the last generation Prius. When it comes to cargo capacity, the Prius gains 2 cubic feet over the previous generation Prius, and you get an extra 2 if you opt for the model without the spare tire, because the load floor is a little bit different. In terms of comparisons, this is nearly double the average mid-sized sedan. For instance, the Toyota Camry has a fairly practical trunk in the mid-sized segment. However, at just 15 cubic feet, it is decently smaller than what we're seeing inside this Prius. And that's just talking about regular mid-sized sedans. If you were talking about hybrid mid-sized sedans, then this would be nearly 3 times the cargo capacity in the average hybrid sedan out there. We have a new test here at Alex and Autos. It is a luggage test. You'll notice we have these all new and all snazzy 24-inch hard-sided roller bags. That means they don't squish quite as easily as soft-sided luggage would. In this all-new test, the Prius scores a 5/11 score, and what that means is we were able to fit 5 of these, as you can see, right back here behind the rear seats and still close the cargo lid. We were not able to fit more because they can't go in this position. You could, however, fit a little bit more luggage on each side, and if you fold down the rear seats, we were able to squeeze 11 of them inside the vehicle. When it comes to my exclusive trunk comfort index, this scores 10 out of 10 points if you get the model with the spare tire. If you get the model without, I'm going to have to drop that down to 9 out of 10 points. Either way, this is an extraordinarily practical cargo area. We also have a helper handle to help you close the trunk lid. Because we're in the 2 Eco model, we have fabric seats. You'll notice this is sort of a 2-tone fabric design. We have height adjustable shoulder belts for both the driver and the front passenger. Taking a closer look at the seat, you'll notice that there are 2 tones, but there are actually 3 different fabrics involved. The 2-tone scheme is continued on the doors, where we have the black upper, black lower, and a tan middle section. We have a much higher percentage of soft touch plastics in this cabin than we did in the last generation of Prius. We have a soft touch armrest, and this tan center section that extends the entire portion of the door is a soft touch plastic as well. The general theme of the dashboard should be very familiar if you've seen any Prius model of the past. However, parts quality is definitely higher. Again, this tan portion of the dashboard is a soft touch plastic. We have a more stylized center cluster right here, which contains the infotainment system, 2 large air vents as well. The instrument cluster is again centrally mounted like we saw in Priuses of the past. The trim continues all the way from the center stack on over there to the passenger side. We have a little bit more of a 3D effect than we've had in the past. You'll notice how curved this dashboard really is. We have a moderately sized glove compartment. I was not able to fit a large tablet computer inside there, but it is a bin style, which means it can easily handle your instruction manuals. As I said before, the instrument cluster is centrally mounted. On the left side right here, we have our traditional gauges like our speedometer, trip computer, fuel gauge, mile per gallon gauge, etc. Then we have a separate LCD right next to that, and that's where you'll find your trip computer. That's controlled via a button on the steering wheel. It's an awful lot more attractive than previous generations of the Prius. Also is more fully featured with an awful lot more modern look to it. Below the 2 air vents, we have our touchscreen infotainment, or optionally a navigation system as well. This is one of Toyota's latest designs, where we have touch buttons on either side and of course a touchscreen in the middle, along with a single slot optical disc player right there. In the 2 Eco, we don't have XM satellite radio input, so we just have AM, FM, Bluetooth, single USB input, and of course, again, that CD right there. You can choose setup to change certain vehicle settings. We also have a car option, and this is where you'll find your typical trip computer information that we've seen in other Priuses of the past. Multiple trips right there, as well as the energy display so you can see what exactly the hybrid system is doing. Below that, we have a single zone automatic climate control system. It has an eco mode over here where you can make the system just a little bit more energy conscious. And then this option right here allows the system to focus more on the vents pointing at the driver, so it again will save you a little bit more energy. Below that, we have the typical Prius shifter that we've seen before. It always returns to this particular position. If you want to move it to neutral, we just click it all the way over to the left, hold it, and then let it go. If you want drive, over to the left, down, and then let it go. If you want reverse, basically the same thing, over to the left, up, and then let it go. B is for engine braking, so we just pull down on it right there, and it'll give us maximum engine braking. If you want to park the Prius, that's this button right over here, or you could just turn the car off with this start-stop button up on the left side of your screen. That will automatically put the vehicle in park. The drive mode is right over here. This cycles between power, normal, and eco mode. And then we have an EV button right here that encourages the vehicle to stay in EV mode just a little bit longer than usual. Below that, we have a storage area with no lid. This is what the new Prius key looks like. It is a little bit different than the Prius key of the past. And we have 2 large cup holders right between the front seats. You'll notice that I have a USB cord hanging out right there, and that's because if we move just a little bit further back, we have a 12-volt power outlet. This is where you'll find the USB input and the auxiliary input. It does have to hang out right here by the cup holders. Between the front seats, we have a padded center armrest. It flips open towards the passenger side. You notice we have a small shelf here that is removable to put wallets or that sort of thing on. Then we have a fairly deep storage cubby underneath that. The steering wheel is an all-new design, and because we're in one of the lower end trims, ours is not Softex wrap, so it's just a urethane wheel. We have sport grips up top. round wheel overall, and then a large spoke right here at the bottom of the steering wheel. On the left side, we have the controls for our infotainment system, volume up, down, track, forward, backward, mode. We also have voice command and dedicated phone hang-up and pickup buttons. But we also have a trip computer button, which is a little bit interesting because that's divorced from the rest of the buttons that control that instrument cluster and multifunction display. As with most Toyota models, the cruise control is controlled via this stalk on the steering wheel. When it comes to acceleration, this model ran from 0 to 60 in 9.6 seconds, which is 0.2 of a second faster than the last model that we tested. Part of the reason for that is that this is the lightest version of the modern Prius, and logically we should get a slightly faster 0 to 60 score in this particular trim. But in addition to that, the Prius in general has become a little bit more efficient and a little bit lighter weight. Toyota has also altered the way the power flows through the hybrid synergy drive transmission, and that helps improve low-end acceleration, it appears, in our 0 to 30 scores. Therefore, I'm going to give this a C+ when it comes to acceleration. The reason the Prius is still a C is because you will find much faster acceleration times in your average hybrid mid-sized sedan. Those run from 0 to 60 in around 7 to 7.5 seconds. That would be entries like Toyota's own Camry, the Ford Fusion Hybrid, as well as the Optima Hybrid, Sonata Hybrid, etc. Braking has improved in the Prius. We ran from 60 to 0 in 120 feet. However, the braking feel is still a little bit unusual. Although Toyota has tweaked this hybrid system, it still displays the same characteristics that we saw in the last generation Prius. Transitions between regenerative braking and friction braking, or friction braking and regenerative braking, are not as smooth as we see in most of the other hybrids out there. That said, however, 120 feet is a little bit shorter than your average mid-size sedan, so actual stopping distances preventing that accident in front of you, the Prius does score quite well. Toyota has made a big deal out of this generation of the Prius handling better than the last generation, and that definitely is true. I'm going to give this a B- when it comes to handling. The Prius definitely feels more sorted than before, especially out back. The rear suspension design has been changed for this generation of the Prius. It helps the rear end feel more planted in the corners. However, we really don't have much steering feel in the Prius. I know a lot of cars out there have electric power steering, but the Prius is one of the most numb. That was true of the last generation. It's still true of this generation of the Prius, even though the steering has improved. Out here on these rough gravel roads, the Prius rides better than you might think based on its external size. The reason for that is the Prius at around 3,000 pounds is a little bit heavier than some of those subcompact or compact sedans out there, and that really does help improve the ride. In addition to that, we have slightly higher profile tires than you see in many of the mainstream compact and subcompact cars. Again, that helps cushion the ride just a little bit. Thanks to the improvements in this suspension design, especially back there in the rear end of the Prius, I'm going to give this an A when it comes to the ride. The previous generation model could feel upset over broken pavement, especially in the corners. That's not happening in this generation of the Prius. This is definitely still not a corner carver, as I said earlier, but overall the composure level is definitely higher. The biggest area where the Prius still lacks the average mid-sized hybrid sedan, including Toyota's own Camry Hybrid, is really in on-center steering feel. When you're going around a corner, it feels like you have to actually turn the wheel back to center just a little bit more aggressively than you do in the competition. Most of the other sedans tend to return to center just a little bit more eagerly. That is likely due to the suspension design up front. One of the other areas that the Prius has improved for 2016 is the cabin noise score. We scored 73 decibels, which is nearly 2 decibels quieter than the last Prius we tested. Keep in mind, we are of course in the base trim of the Prius. We understand that the upper level trims are a little bit quieter. 73 decibels isn't one of the quietest hybrids out there, but it is comparable to the average 4-cylinder mid-size sedan. Of course, fuel economy is what the Prius is all about. Our last spin in the 2015 Prius, we averaged around 49 miles per gallon over a week of very mixed driving. In this Prius, we've been averaging between 52 and 65 miles per gallon over a week of very mixed driving. Driving this vehicle hard, I was only able to get the fuel economy score down to about 52. This vehicle appears to be much more efficient than the last generation of the Prius in real-world driving. This week has been just about as hot as the last time we were driving the Prius, so we have been using the air conditioning just as much as in the last generation as well. Keep in mind that all of our scores have been in the 2 Eco trim that we're driving right here. The 2 Eco uses different tires than we see in the rest of the Prius lineup. They're narrower than you find in top-end trims, and they're also a different compound than you find in the regular Prius 2. The tire compound likely affected the braking and the handling scores in a negative way, but it affects our fuel economy score in a very positive way. If you treat this vehicle gently, you can get over 60 miles per gallon quite easily. And keep in mind, I drive up and over a 2,200-foot mountain pass every day, and I've still been getting 60 miles per gallon without even trying. The 2016 Prius is without a doubt the sportiest Prius, the fastest Prius, the best handling Prius, the best riding Prius ever built. But does that make the Prius a sporty option in the hybrid segment? Not really. The sportiest option in this hybrid segment would probably be something like the Accord Hybrid or the Fusion Hybrid. They're faster than this, they handle better than this, they also ride better than this, but they're not nearly as fuel efficient as this. This will actually get over 20 miles per gallon better than my best score in the Ford Fusion Hybrid. The Honda Accord Hybrid does come close, but we won't see what it will actually do in the real world until next year because it has taken a year off and it's going to come back as a 2017 model year. When it comes to pricing, it's very obvious that Toyota is targeting mid-size sedan shoppers. This starts at $24,200 for the 2 model. If you want the 2 Eco like we've been driving right here, that's $24,700. If you're shopping for the base 2 model, I would say pay the extra bucks, get the 2 Eco, you'll get better fuel economy. There really are not too many differences between the 2 models. From that point, you step up into the 3 model, which does bring you standard feature equipment that we don't find on this particular model, like the larger screen, navigation, some of the other niceties on the inside, and the ability to get Softex seats. Softex is not leather, it's imitation leather or pleather. If you'd like to get options like lane keeping assistance, pedestrian detection, pre-collision warning, pre-collision braking, and full-speed radar adaptive cruise control, that is available in the 3 and the 4 model. If you fully load your Prius 4, you'll end up at around $32,540, which is also just about the same price as a top-end Toyota Camry. When comparably equipped, a Prius will be about $1,000 more expensive than a Toyota Camry. It will also be at least 2 to 3 seconds slower 0 to 60. Of course, it depends on which engine you get in your Camry, of course. However, for that price difference, you will get 2 to 3 times the fuel economy in your Prius, and that really will impact your bottom line long-term if you plan on owning your vehicle for, say, more than 3 years or so. This vehicle versus the average Toyota Camry sold in the United States will cut fuel costs in half and will actually pay for itself in about 2 years. The Prius doesn't really have much natural competition for 2016, but 2017 is when things are going to get a little bit interesting. We have the brand new Hyundai Ioniq coming up that will be available as a plug-in hybrid, a regular hybrid, or an EV, and in hybrid form, it is aiming squarely at the Toyota Prius. In fact, Hyundai has been bragging that they expect to get better fuel economy numbers than a Toyota Prius. I'm not quite sure whether that will bear out in the real world because we have been able to get 60 to 65 miles per gallon in very average driving situations with this vehicle, and I'm not quite sure if you can actually get that high with a traditional dual clutch transmission like we do see in the Hyundai Ioniq. However, the Ioniq is likely also going to be a little bit less expensive than the Prius. It's also going to be a little bit bigger than a Prius. It's about 6 inches longer, and a lot of that goes straight into the interior. Personally, I prefer the more traditional interior style of the Hyundai Ioniq as well, and it wouldn't surprise me if it handled and felt a little bit better than this out on the road. I don't know when I'll be able to get my hands on that Hyundai model, but be sure and stay tuned, subscribe to this channel, and that review will be coming up just as soon as possible. On the Honda side, we have the Honda Accord Hybrid, which has taken a year off, but in its previous generation version, I actually preferred it to the previous generation Prius. We don't know what the new 2017 Honda Accord will be like, but its fuel economy is going to get suspiciously close to the Prius. The last generation Honda Accord Hybrid, if you drove it very gently, could approach Prius-like numbers. If you started to drive it a little bit harder, then there really was a gap that opened up between the two. However, the Accord is considerably larger than this. It also feels more grown-up. It handles a little bit better. It's an awful lot quieter inside, and it's a decent amount faster 0 to 60. A lot of that will translate directly into the 2017 model because it uses essentially the same hybrid system but tweaked and refined for the new model year. But again, like the Hyundai, I haven't driven that Honda Accord Hybrid yet, so stay tuned for that review. Even when it does come, however, it's not going to approach the Prius when it comes to the fuel economy, especially in this 2 Eco trim. The Accord is likely going to be absolutely excellent for your average mid-size sedan, but I don't expect it to regularly go over 55 miles per gallon. This vehicle can easily go over 55 if you treat it gently. For some reason, and I'm not quite clear why, a lot of people want to compare the Prius to the Chevy Volt. They're really not the same sort of thing. This is a regular hybrid. The Volt is a plug-in gasoline electric hybrid. If you treat your Volt well, you will get up to about 50 miles of electric-only range, after which point you're going to end up averaging around 40 to 42 miles per gallon in my tests. If you're simply comparing the vehicles based on the cost of transportation, the Prius is going to be less expensive to buy, and if your commute is longer, it's going to be less expensive to operate. If your commute is relatively short and you could stay either entirely within that EV range or just barely within the EV range, then the Volt is going to be less expensive to operate for most people in the US. I personally think that with the latest generation of the Chevy Volt and its increased EV range, the two vehicles have really grown further apart. However, Toyota does have an answer to the Chevy Volt, and that is the upcoming Prius Prime. That will get an entirely different front end, an entirely different back end look, and it will be a plug-in hybrid. We don't know too much about it just yet, but we do expect to be seeing it very, very soon. I personally think that the more appropriate Chevy competitor to the Prius is actually the Malibu Hybrid. Very much like we see out of Honda with the Honda Accord Hybrid, I think their mid-size sedan competes with this just a little bit more directly than the Chevy Volt. It's a traditional gasoline-electric hybrid. It will get 47 to 50 miles per gallon depending on how you drive it, which is of course approaching what we see over here in the Toyota Prius. Of course, like the Accord, the Malibu is a sedan. It's not a liftback, so it's not going to be as practical as the Prius when it comes to cargo carrying. It has a slightly more grown-up character to it. It, of course, also offers Apple CarPlay and Android Auto, very much like the Accord Hybrid. Toyota has without a doubt created the best Prius ever with the all-new 2016 Prius. This handles better than before, it performs better than before, it stops shorter than before, it gets better fuel economy. We have an even bigger cargo area that's even more practical than Priuses of the past. If you were a Prius fan before, you will love the all-new Prius. If, however, you didn't like the Prius before, I don't suspect there's enough changed in this generation to really change that many minds. The Prius still focuses heavily on fuel economy to the detriment of on-road feel and handling ability. This definitely handles better than before and it feels better than before, but the steering feel is definitely a little odd compared to your average compact or mid-size sedan. It's not just that there's not a lot of weight going on there, but the general design of the front suspension and the way the suspension is tuned in this vehicle causes the steering to be a little bit lackluster. It doesn't return to center quite as easily as your average sedan, but that does improve fuel economy. Acceleration, of course, is definitely behind your average compact or mid-sized sedan, even the hybrid versions that you see out there in the market as well. 0 to 60 in about 9.5 seconds is definitely on the slower side of this segment. However, fuel economy is 2 to 3 times higher than your average mid-sized sedan and easily double what you find in even some of the most efficient compact sedans out there. And unlike your average compact sedan, when you find yourself stuck in traffic, fuel economy simply goes up in the Prius. Be sure and let me know what you think about the 2016 Toyota Prius down there in the comment section down below. Hit that subscribe button down there as well. Subscribers help us grow and help us get access to new vehicles like the upcoming Hyundai Ioniq and the upcoming Honda Accord Hybrid. We do hope to have reviews on those before the end of the year, so be sure and stay tuned because they really are going to be the closest competition to the Prius, and we should be seeing them very, very soon. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week.